Hi all, welcome back to my channel Pharma Bliss. Now we are going to discuss about the topic homeostasis. Homeostasis is defined as an dynamic equilibrium by maintaining the physical and chemical conditions within normal limits. When the body's equilibrium condition gets disturbed by an external stimuli, there will be a disruption in the homeostasis process. There are two types of feedback mechanism. One is positive feedback mechanism, the other one is negative feedback mechanism. The feedback loop consists of detector, control center, and effector. So these are the basic components which are involved in the feedback mechanism. The change in the internal and external environment is called stimulus. The stimulus may be oxygen level, blood sugar and pH levels, water level and internal temperature. When there is a change in the internal environment, the impulse will be sent to the detector or sensor that receives the input and integrates that incoming information in order to transmit to the control center. The detector mentioned here is an receptor. Once the detector detects the impulse, it will send the impulse to the control center in order to regulate the variables within the certain range. Once the effector receives the output from the control center, it results in an appropriate change to maintain the variable factors within that particular limit. So here, the effector may be in muscles or glands. Finally, the response may be in same direction in the case of positive feedback mechanism, and for the negative feedback mechanism, the response may be in the opposite direction. Negative feedback systems in all the living things continuously regulate the critical body processes such as temperature, pH, and regulation of the hormone in order to maintain the homeostasis. The human body maintains a stable core temperature of 37 degrees Celsius through homeostasis process. The feedback mechanism is a biological control system that regulates the body temperature by detecting the changes and initiating appropriate physical responses. When the body temperature falls below the normal level, the thermoreceptors detect the drop in the temperature and sends impulse to the hypothalamus in order to activate the warming mechanisms. The effectors such as skeletal muscle shivers and generates the heat. Likewise, blood vessels in the skin constricts the and reduces heat loss so that the body gets warms up to the normal temperature and the warming response thus negates the initial decrease in the temperature. When the body temperature rises due to heat exposure or exercise, the thermoreceptors in the skin sends impulse to the hypothalamus and detect the rise in the body temperature. The hypothalamus, which is the control center in the brain, compares the actual body temperature. Then it sends impulse to the effector, which is nothing but sweat glands or blood vessels. Sweat glands increases the sweat secretion, whereas blood vessels in the skin produces cutaneous vasodilatation. The action of the sweat cools the body, whereas increased blood flow to the skin surface dissipates the heat. Finally, the body temperature returns to the normal level. Now we will discuss how high blood sugar level gets maintained. So hyperglycemia is a condition when blood glucose level gets increased. So after a meal, when the blood glucose level increases, the beta cells in the pancreas detect the high blood glucose level. So immediately, the pancreas, which is the control center, releases the insulin into the bloodstream. The effectors such as body cell increases the glucose uptake, whereas the liver stores the glucose as glycogen, which is called as an glycogenesis process. So finally, blood glucose level decreases back to the normal, and the lowering of the blood glucose inhibits further insulin release, that is called as a negative feedback mechanism. Hypoglycemia is a condition when the blood sugar level gets decreased. So during fasting, when the blood glucose level gets decreased, it sends the impulse to the alpha cells in the pancreas in order to detect the low glucose level. So immediately the pancreas, which is the control center, releases the glucagon into the bloodstream. So finally, the effectors such as liver converts the glycogen to the glucose and gluconeogenesis in the liver gets increased. Blood glucose level rises back to the normal, and the rise in the blood glucose level inhibits the further glucagon release that is maintained by the negative feedback mechanism. Another example for the negative feedback mechanism is the maintenance of the blood pressure. Blood pressure is maintained through a negative feedback loop where baroreceptors sense changes and triggers heart rate and vascular adjustments to stabilize the blood pressure. So finally, we will look into the positive feedback mechanism, in which childbirth is an example for this. As the fetus pushes against the cervix, it stretches the cervix, and this mechanical stretching is the initial stimulus. The sensory nerve endings in the cervix detect the stretching and sends impulse to the brain, particularly to the hypothalamus, which is the control center. The hypothalamus responds by signaling the posterior pituitary gland to release the hormone oxytocin into the bloodstream. Oxytocin stimulates stronger and more frequent uterine contractions, and these contractions push the baby further downward. So as the baby head pushes more on the cervix stretches further, and this leads to more oxytocin to release that causes an stronger contractions, and the loop continues and amplifies the response. Once the baby gets delivered, cervical stretching stops. This removes the initial stimulus that causes the oxytocin to get stopped. So this is the best example for the positive feedback mechanism.